Tobias Harris. And Tobias drills it. Sixers up one.
Embiid fakes, Embiid down the lane.
What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap Podcast. My name is Sean Barnard, back with my guy James Birrane, and it's been a fiery day in the association. We need some basketball back because people are just yelling at clouds, fired up about everything. We need some basketball to talk about. And in the latest, we have a little bit of a breakdown, a Doc Rivers versus JJ Redick versus Pat Bev versus Austin Rivers, a bunch of cross matches going in here. So I'm excited to dig into that as well as touch on the Sixers as a whole. We do have a roster move to talk about with Darius Bazley receiving a 10-day contract, a new member of the Philadelphia 76ers to discuss. So excited to break all that down before I get too far. James, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well, man. It's always an interesting time of the year, the 6 days between games,
Yep.
Plus the All-Star break. So it's always a fun time, a little bit slow moving start of the week, but hopefully it'll end nice with 3 games in 4 days against, the top 4, 3 of the top 4 seeds in the East. It'll be fun. So we'll enjoy this break and then get to it, but plenty of talk about. There's always something, man. It never ends.
Yeah, and one of those games on Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock will be taking place against the Milwaukee Bucks here in Philadelphia. Sixers versus Bucks. A warm welcome, I'm sure, for Doc Rivers stepping back into the city. So I think I can comfortably say that Doc Rivers will receive some boos. I'm pretty confident in that. I do want to get your temperature check real quick, James. What do you think the reception to Patrick Beverley will be?
I think people will happily receive Pat Bev. I think I was like one of the few on that first day to not really be too upset about the Pat Bev trade. And since then, I think the reaction from fans, at least what I've seen on Twitter, was that they really valued him. And not for bad reason, I think for all good reasons. But I think we're seeing now that the pandering that he does is not individual to, not unique to this city. It's wherever he goes, no matter what he does, he's always going to rep that city hard, which I can respect. But we'll see. Obviously, once we get into a couple more conversations here, he is not loyal to any specific situation. He's loyal to the one he is currently in. So I think he'll get a good reception here. But I also think that given due time, Sixers fans will also realize that he was pretty replaceable on this roster.
Yeah, I'm a very pro Patrick Beverley guy from a basketball perspective. That I do like him as a player. I am grateful for the time he spent here in Philadelphia. I thought he was a positive asset and frankly better than I expected on the Sixers team. And I don't want that to be misremembered. I will say that he's doing about as bad as possible of job as to continue to be well liked in Philly, if that's remotely in his goals. When he got traded originally, I still think there's a non-zero chance that he's back in the Sixers uniform next year. I see a world where that happens for sure. He's also one of the only players, I think the only player that is making more money from the podcast space than he is from his NBA career, which is a feather in his hat, I guess. I'll give him the respect there. And he is here to stir up the pot, make comments, and that's what he does best, both on and off the court. So I want to kick things off with a couple quotes here. Before we dive fully into the Pat Bev side of things, there's kind of been a spinoff on a JJ Redick versus Pat Bev conversation, but I want to make sure we stick with kind of the meat of the conversation, which was JJ Redick rightfully calling out Doc Rivers. So I want to begin by playing this clip here of JJ Redick specifically talking about things, and then a couple other comments that I want to jump into here. So let's let it rip here.
Side note real quick. No one's going to react to Doc's audio there. We've been here 7 minutes since we showed that audio. Nobody's going to react to Doc's audio?
Do you want me to get it repeated for you?
We don't have to repeat it.
I can repeat
I've seen the trend now. I've seen the trend for years.
What's the trend?
The trend is always making excuses. Doc, we get it. Taking over a team in the middle of the season is hard. It's hard. We get it. Just like getting traded in the middle of the season is hard for a player. We get it. But it's always an excuse. It's always throwing your team under the bus. They lose to Memphis. Oh, it's his players. Memphis was playing G League guys and two-way guys. Then you look at his quotes over the weekend. Now he wants to take credit for the James Harden trade to the Clippers working out. He wants credit for that. There's never accountability with that guy.
Well,
there's never accountability.
Well, let me say a couple of things. Number one.
So with that there, James, a couple things I want to begin with. Number one, JJ Redick probably as well versed as anyone to have an opinion on this, that he has played for
Mhm.
Doc Rivers, he has played against Doc Rivers, he has worked with Doc Rivers, and he has covered Doc Rivers from the media space. He has as much of like the insights of Doc Rivers as anyone that there could be. He's had some very successful years under Doc Rivers, also had success against Doc Rivers, all these things. So I'll begin by throwing it right to you. What's your reaction from hearing all that?
I'm glad somebody that's of his caliber finally said something. I think a
Uh-huh.
lot of us have kind of been hip to this, as they say, hip to this. I don't even know what you want to call it. This rigmarole that Doc Rivers does on a yearly basis, and even when he's only worked for a couple of weeks in a season, he's still found a way to do all of this garbage that he tends to do. And JJ finally calls him out on it. And obviously, we'll get into the aftermath of that. But I think it means a lot for someone that is in JJ Redick's shoes to have said that. I do also take a lot of the stuff that's said on those shows like with a grain of salt, but he went to back it up. He stood on his statement, and I do think that there's validity to what he's saying. Obviously, we've seen it over the last couple of years, but for him to have said that and bring out the receipts too to show multiple instances where he's thrown his team under the bus and where he does not do it the best job, Doc Rivers, and then obviously we'll get into what he then says down the road here as well. But he is JJ. Before we go into even breaking down the Doc stuff, he is, I think, doing his best to not, I don't want to say save, but bring basketball media to a better place. And I think that him controlling the narrative is a much better stance for us to be in and for us to, I believe what he says, right? Like he's been in those shoes, like you said. So I'm happy that he says something, and maybe people will start to turn their eyes and be like, you know what? Maybe he's right. Maybe Doc is always like the problem, because I think that he's not been the scapegoat when he should have been in a lot of different scenarios. And I think the thing that made me laugh the most, or pissed me off the most, maybe, was like the whole James Harden thing where he was like, yeah, I called the Clippers. I said this was going to be great. And then JJ calling him out on that was great, because like, what are we talking about? Not only can I not believe that that's the case, but the fact that he goes out there and tells people that and people believe it is crazy to me. Like, by all accounts, Harden was a big reason why he got fired at the end of last year. So it makes no sense to me that he would be advocating for that to happen. So just a lot of bullshit from Doc, it seems like, all the time, and it seems like even more now that he feels comfortable publicly making these statements. So it's just a brutal situation. He's the worst person ever. Like, he is just not enjoyable at all.
Yeah, he's the quintessential guy who wants 100% of the credit and 0% of the blame.
Yeah.
And there's been some straight up gems of quotes coming out of Doc Rivers in Milwaukee. The half our team was here, half our team was in Cabo already. That coming out after they lost to the Grizzlies, which JJ mentioned in that clip. The Grizzlies with 2 ways in G League guys. Shout out my guys, GJ Jackson, Vince Williams Jr., awesome players that they compete their brains out, but they just should not be winning against this Milwaukee Bucks team. And then like some of just like, it was so clear to me, Doc Rivers with this Sixers team, he looked like he was over it. He looked like he was ready to retire, do all this. The fact that he got called out of retirement in the first place and then is now probably doing an even worse job when we just talk about like, there's never been a guy that has done less with more talent than Doc Rivers. But I do want to just bring it in. I have one more quote I want to pull up from him, as well as our guy, Pat Bev, who we did mention here, did get brought right into the fire. And he tweeted this out here that it said, "This man, Doc, actually saved your career. Started you when no one else wanted to, and you retire, go on TV, and you say that at JJ Redick." Now, JJ and him had a little bit of back and forth here that JJ essentially disputing that, which he's right to, absolutely, saying how he had a contract with a player option with the same money that he elected to stay, same promises, all these things, and then Pat Bev kind of pushing back. I also want to note that with that specific statement, he did not rebuke or fight back against any of these statements that JJ Redick made. He did do a personal attack on JJ Redick. I understand that you are in a tough spot trying to defend the most overrated coach in professional sports history for Patrick Beverley, who's currently your head coach, and a guy that Pat Bev receiving what I believe is the biggest contract that he ever received during his Clippers days. So there's fair to be some sort of allegiance to Doc Rivers, never mind the fact that, once again, he's currently playing for the guy. But what was your thoughts on Pat Bev jumping in the mix here?
Yeah, not the top, not really. Again, I think this is for Pat. I guess he's doing this media portion of his career, which I think that it's great that they do it. I think it's great that JJ kind of started that space. I also think he owes JJ some like some do as well. JJ was one of the first in that space while playing and doing his podcast. But Pat's doing his thing, dude. I really have a hard time taking anything he says or does seriously at this point. I think it's all kind of like, I want to say it was, I forget who it was, Kyle Neubeck kind of likened him to like a WWE superstar. Like he's doing these to promote his pay-per-views, and he's doing this to like just his persona. So I have a hard time taking it seriously. But on top of that, like JJ had the best 2 seasons of his career in Philadelphia after he stopped playing for Doc Rivers. And again, JJ was a very good player. I can't agree with that at all from Pat Bev. I do think that it's kind of silly for him to call JJ out in that way. But he could have backed up Doc in a lot of other ways and said, well, Doc does this, or Doc, helps us in this way. And rather than supporting Doc, he kind of just went right at JJ's knees, metaphorically or not. That's a deep cut joke. But I do think that was kind of lame from Pat Bev's part. And I do think that JJ held his ground well and I'm glad he kind of went back at him, because I think it's his right to do so.
Yeah, absolutely is. And very, very like I my respect for JJ has very much grown post his playing career and post his Sixers career. And I feel the exact opposite about Doc Rivers, that like my lack of respect for him has continued to grow. That I can't believe I probably hate him even more than I did when he was the Sixers coach. That all the stuff that was obnoxious while he was here, the lack of taking accountability, the constant blame, the constant excuses, the thinking you're the brightest mind in every single room that you walk in, all that has just been like magnified in this Milwaukee Bucks situation and in his TV gig. That I hated hearing him on TV too, with all the just Doc-isms and things that he's spitting out there. And just the guy is just a classic. And I'm going to give my full Doc Rivers rant after this last bit here, but I do want to give this final one, which this might have taken the cake of this coming out just after this whole kind of ceasefire. I don't know who in the Milwaukee Bucks organization continues to let Doc Rivers talk, but I did want to play this last clip here.
Personally, I'll be honest. I told our owners when they called, I said, I think I don't understand why you're doing this, and they said, one of the things they said was, well, it doesn't matter. We've done it now, and we want you, and so that was a tough one. That's where you had the hesitation.
So not only has Doc Rivers, who's on record of here being a guy that was a consultant for the Milwaukee Bucks for Adrian Griffin, a guy that I would describe that job title as the backstabber in the organization, of making his plate, creating his path to becoming the head coach with 2 top 75 of all-time players on the team, who's nonstop talking about how hard this challenge is. He's saying he didn't even want to do it. Like he can't believe that they fired Adrian Griffin, who I think is fair to say you somewhat had a hand in him being fired, even if not directly. The fact of you being around the organization, being a consultant while you're actively working for ESPN, him being one team's consultant just feels wrong and weird and just very strange situation that I don't think I've ever really seen before. So all that for him to go and say, I mean, we're a couple losses away from Doc Rivers straight up saying that the Milwaukee Bucks have blackmailed him into becoming the head coach of this team, that he wanted no part of it. He wanted to stay retired forever, but they forced him to take this job. James, what were your thoughts hearing that whole spiel?
The only thing I can the only thing that pops into my head is the meme, the Eric Andre show meme, where he turns and shoots the guy, and he was like, why would you do this? Like, why would the Bucks do this to us? Why would they hire me? Why would they do this? Just all the things. Like, would you ask Doc, or would you ask Pop that question? I wouldn't wish this on anybody. Like, acting like this is the most difficult trail that anyone's ever walked in their entire lives. And on top of that, he feels like he's 90 years old, the way that he like interacts with people, and just like so miserable. I can't do it. I don't know why anyone. And then also like Giannis being like, this is so tough for me. Like, this is my 4th coach in X amount of time. Like, again, you asked for this, man. You wanted this. You wanted what's his name gone? I can't even think of his name. Budenholzer
Adrian
gone.
Griffin. Budenholzer,
You wanted Adrian Griffin and Adrian Griffin. You wanted him gone. And then Giannis goes out and said, like, that whole team is so annoying. Like, I don't like them. I didn't to start the season. I really didn't like them. And now you add into the mix Doc Rivers, and it's just like this bomb of terrible personalities all mixing into one space. So Doc, terrible. I can't even talk about him anymore. I know you got your whole, I'm ready to like let you loose here, because I'm just so like sick of even dealing with it.
Yeah, I did want to build it all up with all those quotes and kind of the conversation, but just to put it out there, like Doc Rivers is the most overrated head coach in professional sports. So there's never been a coach to do less or do less with more than Doc Rivers in his career. That throughout his entire career as a head coach, which he's had tons of all-time great players, that in game sevens, he has an overall 16-33 record as a head coach. That in NBA history, there's been 3-1 leads blown 13 times. Doc Rivers has conceded 3 of these. His record in closeout games with 3 wins is sitting at just below 32.7% with that 16-33 record. For reference, the next highest of an active head coach is Darvin Ham with 50% with just a 2-2 record, with which is a pretty small sample size there. If we want to look to a larger sample size, it's Mike Malone with a 7-4 record. When you have 3 wins in a 7-game series, that should be essentially, you got this. This is the time for the other team to roll over. With Doc Rivers, it's the exact opposite, that his teams are the ones that roll over. And there are so many instances of him straight up being outcoached. And beyond just like the Celtics destroyed the Sixers because they went to the 2 big lineup and Doc Rivers had no answer for that. For a guy that like has been around basketball as long as he has had a wildly successful playing career, has had success as a head coach, it was always so frustrating to me that my biggest complaints about him as a head coach was the feel for the game stuff. That throughout the flow of a game, making adjustments on the fly, having a feel for this guy's got it going, we need to leave him in. It was always so scripted, so by the books, that I don't doubt he does his homework going in. But it's, I would argue, more important as a head coach to be able to have your finger on the pulse of this team needs this right now. I got to leave that guy out there a little longer. I have to cut the minutes. This matchup's working for us. We got to ride with this a little longer. That's what being a head coach is. That there's a lot to it. There's obviously the player management, the X's and O's, drawing up plays. There's a ton that goes into it. But for a guy that has as much and as vast of basketball experience as he had, for the feel of a game to be such a weakness is so just absurd to me. And then like when we're talking about like him directly lying to the media, which he does all the time, and there's quite clear examples that we've even brought up already in this. Like I remember specifically, I personally took offense to some of like the almost demonstrative attitude of I'm greater than you that he took with the media. Like he was an intimidating interview being in that room. I was never a guy who was quick to sprout up my hand and ask Doc Rivers a question because I just, I would defer to other people in the room for this situation. But I've seen it like quite clearly in front of me. Like I remember specifically after DeAndre Jordan, who, by the way, somehow is still playing successful minutes for the Denver Nuggets, that somehow is still giving them positive minutes on the court, which makes zero sense to me because he looked like he could not jump while he was wearing a Sixers uniform. But after Doc Rivers continued to play the corpse of DeAndre Jordan over Paul Reed for months at a time, I remember Derek Bodner specifically asking the question of, what are you going to do with the Paul Reed versus DeAndre Jordan matchup? Now that we've kind of seen it, this was right after Paul Reed had success. And then Doc immediately snaps and says, we're going to do what we've done the whole season. And when it's a small ball matchup, we're going to play Paul Reed. And when it's a bigger center, we're going to go with DeAndre Jordan. And to Bodner's credit, he immediately bites back. It's like, well, you have not done that the whole season. Like Paul Reed has not played in 3 weeks at this point. But my point in this being, like, for Doc Rivers not only to make the wrong on-court decision, but then to defend it and then to make up past situations. Like, dude, we're all watching the game here. You're not doing this closed curtain practice that you can tell us what happened. The game happens in front of everybody. We saw the decision you made. We saw who was on the court. So just this like distorted view that he kind of sees the universe or sees his decision making, the excuse making is so infectious to teams. We're seeing it right in front of our eyes with the Bucks. And I'm so out on this Bucks team. I think this team has zero chance of winning a championship. I think with all the flaws, with all the holes, with Doc Rivers, the excuse is already pouring out. And then there's little things like, did you see the Dame Lillard clip from his all-time starting 5? How do you not throw Giannis in there as far as your top 5? I'm not even a Giannis guy, but as like a neutral party, Giannis is still for sure one of the top 5 players in the NBA. So how do you not name your 2-time MVP teammate as a part of that list? So insane to me. It just feels like there's so much wrong. And I do think the direct source of all of it is still Doc Rivers.
Yeah, dude. And like going back for years now, like I felt like the hire of Doc Rivers for the Sixers was like a credibility thing. It was the ownership being like, we need to move on from this process era. Brett Brown is out. We need to bring in someone with tenure and someone with, people trust him. People like see Doc Rivers. They see validity. They take us seriously. And he's supposed to bring that culture, that accountability. Like, I remember the first thing they like pounded the table for was like, he's going to keep guys accountable. He's going to tell them what they don't want to hear. And obviously we don't know what happened behind closed doors, but for, everything we've seen from then has just been excuse after excuse, pushing guys under the bus. Like, me and my roommate talked about it the other day. Like, how hard, what do you think it was for him to just say, yeah, you know what, Ben Simmons could play point guard for us, or at least give you a real answer to a question that, we still don't know the answer to, how that would have played out otherwise. And I'm not saying, I don't want to have revisionist history and say that, things would have been different, but like, that was maybe the first time we ever like looked at it and was like, you know what, maybe he is like just kind of an asshole. And there's a lot of ways that we could judge that situation. And maybe that was a lot of, I think I look back on that, I think it was a lot of Doc Rivers' issue that caused that. And obviously he allowed Joel to grow into what, take steps into what he is. But there's really no denying that Joel did that on his own. He was having the best season of his career.
Yeah.
He is a force to be reckoned with. It doesn't matter who's holding the clipboard. It could be Joel himself. And I think that he would have done as good of a job. And you look back on Doc Rivers and all of these tenures that he's had, his most successful seasons, he had one of the highest IQ players in the league quarterbacking his offense. You look at Rajon Rondo, and there's clips of Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce talking about how, yeah, dude, when Doc would call up a play, we'd get out of the huddle and Rondo would be like, nah, fuck all that. We're going to do this, and this instead. If that's the case on a team that was winning a championship, how much did that coach have to play?
Yeah.
Not a good coach. So, and we talked about culture, like that's, X's and O's, blah, blah, blah. He might miss the mark on this or this, but culture-wise, he's going to set the standard. And 2 weeks into coaching a team that he's now 3-7 in his first 10 games, he's thrown his ownership and front office under the bus. He's thrown his team under the bus, and he's avoided any sort of accountability for any sort of deficiencies that they have, while having also basically played at least somewhat of a part in getting the original coach fired and then acting like he had no idea why it happened. Like, it's the most insane. Like, he's an evil villain. Like, he's the like antagonist in a movie. That's who Doc Rivers is. He is like, I literally said to someone, I was like, he's just the worst. He's just the worst person in the league right now. He's the worst like ambassador for the game. He's the worst at bringing young guys and showing the new talent. He's the worst at like everything. He's just the worst personality there is. I don't know why anyone would keep him around. And yet not only the Sixers kept him around, but then ESPN gave him a job. And then he was like, you know what, I'm actually going to take a different job. And then he was lying about other teams calling his phone. So I can't do it anymore with this guy. I'm done with him as a whole.
Yeah, he also, another lie from Doc Rivers is him saying that there were 2 other teams that called him about the head coaching job during this season. Just name them. Who called you this season and said we want to hire you as head coach? Because it just didn't happen, man. And as far as to put a bow on some of the record stuff, just to throw this on the table once again, Doc Rivers teams have blown 3 3-1 leads, 4 3-2 leads, 4 other 3-2 leads, not including those, 1 2-0 lead, and have lost game 7 at home 4 times, 5 times if you count the bubble. All time, he's 6-10 in game 7s in his career. I get it that players play games, coaches coach games, but they've had the talent advantage in several of these situations. You've had them on the ropes in all of these situations that I've laid out. And it's so insane. Once again, you will not find a coach who has done less with more than Doc Rivers. And it is all infectious. That I do think genuinely this excuse-making kind of vibe that he gives off, or this constant lack of taking accountability, that trickles down to a team. That you're going to see Giannis doing the same thing. And Giannis is his own man. Like, I'm not saying that he's going to fully become Doc Rivers, but like that sets the standard for your team. And as far as like him as a coach, by the way, I am totally enjoying watching this from afar while seeing it happen within the Milwaukee Bucks. But as far as him as a coach, what is his calling card as a head coach? Like, it was Mr. Accountability, but we just saw like Ben Simmons really still be Ben Simmons under Doc Rivers. We saw James Harden still be James Harden under Doc Rivers, and maybe there was some growth in the pick and roll, whatever. You can nitpick little things, but I wouldn't say that was a clear-cut win from an accountability standpoint. It's not X's and O's because, there just has not very much advanced stuff in that playbook from what we saw, at least with the Sixers side of things. So it's not X's and O's. It's not personality management. It's not offense or defense, really. He's brought in to be this like savior of a defenseman for the Milwaukee standpoint. I think that's a losing battle. Damian Lillard is like atrocious defensively, like even worse than I initially realized. I don't know. I'm once again glad that this is not a Philadelphia issue. Nick Nurse is looking better by the day, but it is quite charming to just watch this from afar, I will say.
Yeah, I'm over it. And like you said, like between Rondo, Chris Paul, and James Harden, he's had like literally maybe 3 of the top 8, top 6 guys in terms of like creation and IQ on the court. Like he's had guys that just have done things for him, that have made
Yeah.
things work for him, and not to mention all the great players that have played under him, or for him. And you even look now, like if so many teams were calling your phone, dude, why'd you end up picking the one with 2 all-star starters with the 2-time MVP? Like you only went there because you thought you had a chance for your team to make it deep into the playoffs and for you to win a championship. For then, like it just seems very selfish, and it seems like that's a lot of where he comes from. And you know, as a coach, you want to see them. You know, Nick Nurse has done a great job of this, and someone who, like from my end, like John Tortorella, the coach of the Flyers, these guys go to bat for their players when they're, you know, when it's time to, but they also hold them accountable when it's time to. And Nick Nurse has done a great job of that. Like when he earlier in the year when Paul Reed got kind of benched in the second half of the game, he was like, Paul wasn't good enough tonight. He's gonna be good enough. He's gonna get there. Like, no, I'm not worried about Paul, but he's got to be better. And that's something that Doc really never did. It was just like he's banished. He is exiled. He will not be playing for the next 3 months, bearing an injury. And that's just shit that I can't deal with. And the whole Maxey thing, there's a lot of jokes about obviously Maxey playing for Doc's team over the All-Star weekend, but it was like, dude, it took him being like the best rookie in the league in his minutes to get time. And then they were putting him in the dunker spot because like, oh, like Ben was playing there. Like you're playing the position that Ben was playing.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna sit you in the dunker. And 6'2" Tyrese Maxey, who cannot dunk standing, you stand right at the block. And like and that was the first time I think we noticed like what the hell is going on with this. But yeah, dude, it's just brutal. It's just not a good time at all.
And not only the Tyrese Maxey that cannot standing dunk, but the Tyrese Maxey that is one of the greatest catch and shoot 3-point shooters, not just on the Sixers, but across the entire NBA. Yeah, let's throw him in the dunker spot. That seems like a great usage of assets and maximizing this roster. But
set a screen for PJ Tucker 3. Like that's what he was doing. What the fuck?
These are real things. Yeah, this happened here in Philadelphia. George Hill was playing over Tyrese Maxey on the Sixers team, man.
Stop.
Doc, God bless you. And the last thing that I'll say to put a bow on all this is if the Sixers somehow lose to the Bucks in a playoff series, man, I don't know if I can take it. I don't know if I can take it. I don't think it's going to happen. I really think like Doc Rivers is that much of a negative. And I do think that this team has legitimate personnel issues in a way that like, I do think Adrian Griffin was dealt a bad hand. That when you go from Drew Holiday, who's one of the greatest perimeter defenders across this entire league, to Damian Lillard, who's on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, your defense is going to be significantly worse. So there has to be some schematic changes. Doc, it is a work in progress. We'll see how things shake out. But yeah, I just can't have a world where that happens. But I do want to shift gears and get over to the actual Sixers a little bit here. We'll start things off. We do have some news in the Sixers world that they have signed Darius Bazley to a 10-day contract. Guy has been absolutely lighting it up in the G League this year with the Delaware Bluecoats. His averages have been off the charts. He's been pretty much a 20-10 guy on a nightly basis. Had some really impressive performances. I had a chance to go down there and check him out. As far as my quick spark notes of his game before I throw it over to you, James, for your thoughts, he's basically kind of one of these rim running big men. He's kind of transitioned. He's a guy who skipped college, went right to the G League, tried to do that kind of pathway. Did not fully work out for him. He still was the 23rd overall pick. Started a ton of games for the Thunder when they were in the bad Thunder era. I believe it was 118 that he totally started. He's played over 200 at the NBA level, which is pretty impressive to have that on your G League, just kind of sitting there. Still just 23 years old. He's kind of like a PJ Washington-ish kind of player. Not a good shooter, and that's going to be ultimately the swing scale on whether or not he makes this roster, has a long-term outlook, I feel. But what are your thoughts on Darius Bazley? Any strong feelings toward him?
Yeah, I think so. Like higher level viewpoint for Bazley, he's basically been playing the small ball 5 for the Bluecoats, and he's kind of been in that role where he's like not big enough to be a big, but doesn't space the floor well enough to be the 3 or 4 that he probably is measured as. But high level athlete, high activity on the court, high like want to, that kind of like he has the aspiration to want to do the right things on the court, which is a good start. Still super young, like 23 is still very young in this league. He has plenty of time to develop. I do think, like you had mentioned earlier, it's like it's a placeholder situation where it's like, hey, you're going to get your chance here while Joel is out. We're going to give you a couple of chances to do some things here. I wonder how much time he'll get. Like the Kenny Lofton situation, like he's not ready to play in the NBA. He's not an NBA player right now. Darius Bazley has shown that he can play some minutes, so I don't mind trying it out. Mo Bamba is kind of like a moot point by this point. You know what I mean? Like he is what he is. So I don't mind it at all. Like bring Darius Bazley along, let him try. One thing I will say that stood out, I have a personal anecdote. One of my coworkers used to work for the Oklahoma City Thunder when Darius Bazley was there. And he raved about his character. He said he's a really, really nice guy. They used to do community events and he would always stay late to work with the kids and hang out and shoot hoops at the middle schools that they used to go to. So seems like a really good guy. Seems like he has a lot to bring to the table. And while I don't expect a lot from him, I always like these kinds of things because like it's always these teams, it's always this team that gives a guy a shot like that has this really niche skill set that maybe he could just play really well in a really like unique role. And that could be important down the stretch and it also might just become nothing. So and probably the latter, but good for him for getting a shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a cool story there. That's great to hear as well. I think kind of the way I look at this is it's a 10-day contract. These 10 days would bring you right up to the deadline, which would be the ending of buyout deals occurring for teams or players potentially becoming available to teams.
Yeah.
I do think the Sixers are completely have their eyes on that market, seeing if a guy pops up. But I do think it's good business and a good standard to set from an organizational standpoint to reward this guy who's been playing incredibly well at the G League level. And I also do get the sense by watching him, like he's a guy that plays hard, that wants it, that is about it, that he wants to be a legitimate high-level basketball and has still the potential to get there. That the shooting is going to be a swing skill. That's not something that has shown improvement by the numbers at the G League level. I'll say my fear with him is he's kind of turned himself into a small ball five as a result of not being a good enough shooter rather than it being the other way around, that sometimes guys kind of transition to I can create an advantage in a way that is that it feels a little bit more default, which I don't love, but he's still a guy that I do think has a high motor, is a high level athlete. He is a lob threat, which to me, I love that and want more of that around this Sixers team. Even Paul Reed, not really a true lob threat in the way that I thought at one point he might be able to become. Bazley more towards that style of big man. And I do like that he's a guy that can get a rebound, put it on the floor, go coast to coast. He's very comfortable doing that. And that's a different style of player than the Sixers have had. So It's good to bring him in. I think ultimately my ideal way is that this totally shakes out is I'm all in on Ricky Council to the point where I think the Sixers should give him a full-time roster spot, give him a long-term contract, and make it one of those deals that ages well. A 4-year, $6 million deal, something like that. By year 3 and 4, that looks like one of the best bargain contracts in the NBA. Do that, elevate Ricky Council, and slide Bazley into a two-way slot. That's essentially the way that I think I would try and make this work and still keep that one roster spot open, whether that is a Danny Green return or another player popping up in there. I think that's how I would kind of function things. So by this style or this game plan, you elevate Ricky Council to a full member of the 15-man squad, which I think he's earned at least that opportunity or shown me enough that I believe in him enough in the long run that should be the case. But what's kind of your thoughts on that kind of construct there?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think Ricky belongs. He's proved that. Obviously, there's still like for him, there's still a lot to work on, which there's a lot of growth there to be had, which is great. But he's proved that he can play and he has the ability to, and he also has the drive to get better. I think we can all kind of trust, his work ethic and what he's proven to have come out here. And you need guys like that, especially during a long season, to come in and in the middle of a game in January, give everything he possibly have. So Ricky deserves to be here, I think. And then, like you said, it creates a little bit of that opening for Bazley or someone like that would then have Turk, Kenny Lofton, and then in this scenario, Darius Bazley as the two-way guys, giving you another spot to add somebody in the mix there. It feels kind of it would be funny for it to be Danny Green. I wouldn't mind that at this point. I think I'm okay with that. But I bet you they're probably waiting on a big. Would you say, like, would you think that they're waiting on a big man to get bought out? Although Nerlens Noel, like who is out there that would be available? Like, I don't really think that there's a large market.
Nobody. And to poke a quick hole in my game plan here, I just did fact check myself. Baisley has played too much NBA ball to be a two-way guy, which I think is probably one of the reasons that he's got on a full-time G League deal at this point. So that unfortunately takes that plan out the window. So more or less, Baisley is playing for his NBA job, at least for the time being. But yeah, that you can only sign a two-way contract with 3 or fewer years of NBA service. He played 4 years with the Thunder, 1 year with Phoenix. So he's ineligible for that. So that pokes a hole in my game plan there. As far as the big man conversation, I'm out on trying to get a big man that I don't think you're going to get better than Paul Reed. Mo Bamba, as much as he's frustrating at times, he's still at short bursts playable. And I don't think you're going to get a Robin Lopez or Bismack Biyombo.
I don't
already
want
got
Robin
the
Lopez. I'm sorry.
No, me neither. That little hook shot that he goes to that feels like he makes 100% of the time. I don't know. I don't think you're going to get a guy that's playable. At least definitely not a guy that's an upgrade over Paul Reed. This is the reason that you paid Paul Reed. So for me, I think it's a better use of assets to sign Ricky Council. And then I can be talked into a Danny Green move that he's a good vibes guy. He is a shooter. I do believe in at least to knock down 3-pointers in a way that is comfortable. He's familiar with the organization. So I'm out on the big man idea.
Yeah, I don't see much of a horizon out there for that. And maybe they do stick with Ricky as a two-way guy to finish this season, and maybe Baisley becomes that variable option to play as a big if he comes in and shows a little bit of something or can be playable at times. God forbid somebody else that's playing in that 4 or 5 spot goes down, he can pick up the slack there. Also, Robert Covington, he would be the option as a small ball 5, but he's dead apparently. He doesn't. There's been no update.
And the last update we had was from Nick Nurse with the quote, "There's no light at the end of the tunnel." So yeah, I don't love the sound of that.
That is damning.
And he's going to be, if he's able to play this year, he'll be a very helpful player on this team. I saw enough to believe that. I hope Rocco can step back on the floor this year.
And that's what but he would be that's Darius Baisley's role, would be a 4 or 5, because Rocco can step in and play that small ball 5. It's not ideal. Darius Baisley playing your 5 is also obviously not ideal. But in those pinch moments, he can do it. And he provides a lot of additional stuff, not to get into that, but he's even another guy. We remember a couple months ago, and it was holy shit, this team was stacked, top to bottom. There's so many guys that can play. And over the last 2-3 weeks, it's been who is even available tonight? There's 7 guys that can play tonight. So they went from a really deep team with a lot of wings and a lot of depth to really injured really quick. So, I think a lot of this break is has been very good for them and will be very good for them on the other side of that. And if you can get a guy like Rocco back in the loop there, these moves are so marginal. None of these guys are going to be playing when it fully matters come playoff time. So as much as I love I love Ricky Council, I would like Darius Baisley to be successful. I think it's kind of one of those things. It's just it is what it is. I hope he has gets a chance and does play well, but I don't imagine it being something that really affects the long-term season.
Yeah, overall, totally agree there. And the last thing I just want to hit on before we get out of here is we did have NBA All-Star Weekend this past weekend. I think the public consensus is that it underwhelmed by a pretty significant margin. But the biggest storyline that I want to talk about is Tyrese Maxey getting his feet wet, getting the first opportunity to play with the big dogs. And I thought it was really cool to watch, even just the way that he interacted with all those guys, seeing all the social media clips, LeBron dapping him up, all these things. Yeah. I saw one tweet floating around that it says, it's like you go to back to school night and realize your kid's the popular kid. And I do think that there was a little bit of that to it, that it's Tyrese is very well respected. There was a clip coming around of Kevin Durant mentioning the potential next faces of the NBA, and Maxey was mentioned within the 6 names that came out of Kevin Durant's mouth. We saw that just, again, the way that he interacted, the way that he commands the room, has the respect of these guys. I was really impressed by that for Tyrese, and for me, that was a bigger takeaway than really any of the on-court stuff.
Yeah, man, I'm happy for the kid. He deserves it. He was fun to watch in that game. It's great to see him kind of get that respect. It felt like he had to work for that, as the last couple of years, like you said, maybe not so much tumultuous, but a roller coaster of role changing, and we've seen so much turnover in this roster, and he's had to mold himself in a bunch of different ways, and now it's kind of finally dude, he's a pillar. He's a real-time player in this league. He got that respect by being named to an all-star team this year, and he got the respect of his peers, like you had mentioned. So it's always great to see, man. You look back on times where we were hoping for anybody to come up as a real, just a general NBA player to come out of these crop of guys. We spent the better part of 5-6 years just hoping somebody would be good. And now you have a guy like Tyrese who has done so much more than we probably even imagined in his 4 short seasons already. So I'm happy for the guy. It's really nice to have another guy to have in that All-Star game to support. Obviously, Joel does his thing, but we've been waiting for that other guy to come through. And James Harden didn't feel particularly ours. He's another guy that really is homegrown and has given back so much more than we could have asked. So I'm happy for the guy.
Yeah, and James Harden technically was an all-star the one year when he was first traded to the Sixers, I believe, but officially it's only been Ben Simmons and Tyrese Maxey as the all-star teammates to Joel Embiid. So cool that Maxey has taken that leap, is that guy, stepped onto the stage. And I also like that he didn't like taking the foot off the gas, that there's a little more competitive fire in Tyrese Maxey's soul than was for most of the stars out there. So I did like seeing that quite a bit. But it's back to the grind after this, that their schedule will be picking up. James, appreciate you for hopping on with me to rip this out. Shout out to Doc Rivers for giving us plenty of content to talk about that. I am enjoying the experience from afar. We will see what the second half of the Sixers season has entailed for us. I think we'll have a pretty good feel following the rest of this second half, but appreciate all you guys for tuning in. Make sure you drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and we talk to you next time right here on Pick Swap Media.